This is my final research presentation for English 1102. And the topic I will research is immigration and its impact on New York City. The presentation will follow this outline: migration versus immigration, the transatlantic slave trade, and Black communities. Finally, Dutch roots in New York and how it birthed a commerce cosmopolitan location. So, as I've studied earlier, my topic is migration and its impact to New York. I believe it is important because New York was a powerful city during colonial America, and my main takeaway was learning the cultural and social impact that immigrants had upon the city. I thought about the actual word immigration because it is key for any content in the presentation, and I was always confused between immigration and migration, but I concluded that immigration was movement from one country to another, whereas migration was movement from one region to another within its borders. In the musical Hamilton and Lafayette declare immigrants, we get the job done. However, the previous definition implies that Hamilton was not an immigrant, but a migrant because his place of birth was within the British Empire. Although this is a more technical distinction, I thought, why does it really matter? Chapter 4 of Historians in Hamilton is a pejorative to the musical's depiction of Hamilton because it feigns over his social disadvantages. It states that Hamilton actually belonged to an elite group of migrants that were granted privileges because of his race and place of birth. The latter taught me about Hamilton's reality, that he did indeed receive a lot of privileges, and it also clarified the distinction between migrants and immigrants. But I wondered, if the musical includes many fictional aspects, why does this one really matter? The musical does indeed portray Hamilton as the idyllic example of the social climb an immigrant can experience in the United States. But given that Hamilton was a migrant, I decided to thread through a more accurate portrayal of immigration in New York, known as the transatlantic slave trade. An article by Adele Oldman called The Hidden History of Slavery in New York does depict the issue of slavery in New York, but she also talks about the half-free community of Black people that intermingled with white people in the city. Although this community co-shared a space with other white people from New York, I found it important to note from the article and from a book of essays titled Slavery in New York that this does not mean that they were socially respected, but it was rather an ambiguous situation to be in. The book and article taught me about the half-free community of Black people in New York. It also taught me about the privileged perspective that this conveys, that New York was a more progressive location, meaning that many immigrants thought that if they moved there, they would be accepted. Ullman's article concludes that the transatlantic slave trade helped develop the city into one of the most powerful ports in the hemisphere. And taking a note from my history class, my professor did mention that the attraction towards New York was because of its commercial advantages. Prior sources in the presentations concluded that Dutch immigrants were responsible for influencing New York's sea trading system. Given that the Dutch West India Company had such a prominent hold on trading with the colonies, they had a reason to settle down. A review with Jennifer Tosh recalled that Dutch colonists in New York were actually under-acknowledged, which I found extremely curious given that these immigrants and their future generations seemed to be in such a position of power and actually helped build the commercial background of New York. I was so curious at this point on how Dutch immigrants had impacted New York, and in an article by Sean Griffin, I found out that he described New York's origins as a Dutch trading post with a decidedly commercial outlook and a polyglot population, revealing how Dutch immigrants had built a multicultural city. Griffin's article not only taught me about how Dutch immigrants had built New York to be a place for commerce or even to build a multicultural location that appealed to many immigrants, but also how it opened a door for radical political ideology. If we go back to the musical Hamilton, it did cost me to thread through immigration and its impact in New York. However, it does depict a more privileged outlook, whereas other sources have taught me more about the commercial prospects and multicultural ambience in the city. So, to summarize, I began by stating New York's depiction in Hamilton, but then through research, I understood how Dutch immigration and the slave trade helped build the city. Then how immigration culture made the city a prosperous location both financially and socially. So my big takeaway from this presentation is that New York City gained social diversity and financial power as a result of immigration throughout generations. It started wrong because of forced slave trade, but it helped build a multicultural cosmopolitan location. Lastly, I have to give an important mention to all the sources that I used. All of them were explained throughout the presentation. They can be found there. They are mentioned in the recording slides. And thank you for listening.